Now, in a shocking incident, a former model who was a finalist in the Miss Switzerland contest was allegedly murdered and purried in a blender by her own husband.
Within the seemingly ordinary walls of their family home, a simmering tension erupted into a nightmarish reality. Christina, a former Miss Switzerland finalist, became the victim of a brutal murder, her remains subject to a level of horror that would horrify even the most seasoned investigators. This was not merely a crime, it was a calculated and grotesque act of desecration. In a terrifying turn of events, her husband, Thomas, not only took Christina's life, but went on to blend her remains in an act that defies comprehension. This is the harrowing story of a woman whose vibrant dreams were extinguished in the most unimaginable way. Christina was a former Miss Switzerland finalist, celebrated for her beauty and grace. She was admired not only for her public persona, but also for her role as a devoted mother to 2 young daughters. On the surface, her life appeared to be perfect, filled with accomplishments and joy. However, the reality of her marriage to Thomas was much darker than it seemed. Despite her public success, Christina faced significant challenges at home. Thomas, her husband, lived in the shadows of her fame. He was not a public figure and did not share the same level of recognition as Christina. Reports indicate that he had a troubled past with a history of conflicts and domestic issues. These struggles would later become crucial in piecing together the events that led to the tragic outcome of their lives. The tension in their relationship was often hidden from the outside world, masked by smiles in family photos and appearances as a typical family. Together, Christina and Thomas had built a life that included 2 beautiful daughters. By all appearances, they looked like a happy family, enjoying the everyday moments that life offers. Yet behind the facade of happiness, there were signs of deeper issues. Friends and neighbors noted the occasional arguments, and whispers of discontent began to circle. Christina's radiant smile often concealed her struggles, and the couple's seemingly idyllic life was fraught with underlying turmoil that few could see. This contrast between public perception and private reality would set the stage for the horrifying events that were to follow. Before the tragic murder, a horrifying pattern of domestic violence wove itself through the lives of Christina and Thomas. What started as a small argument quickly turned into terrifying confrontations. Neighbors and friends became unwilling witnesses to a relationship filled with fear. Reports surfaced of Thomas physically hurting Christina, with one shocking incident where he strangled her in front of others. These were not just fights, they revealed the horror that lay hidden behind their closed doors. Police were called to the home several times. Each time they arrived to find a scene filled with tension and fear. Though the officers saw the signs, Thomas always managed to avoid serious consequences. No arrests were made, allowing the cycle of violence to continue. Each visit from the police only added to the growing fear that wrapped around Christina like a heavy blanket. This violence was not just a single event, it was part of a frightening pattern. What began as arguments quickly turned into violent acts. Christina felt trapped in a nightmare that seemed endless. Friends noticed her growing anxiety and how she appeared smaller, worn down by Thomas's control. It was as if a dark force gripped her life, leaving her scared and isolated. The rising tension created an atmosphere filled with dread. Christina often looked haunted, her eyes filled with unspoken fears. She carried the weight of her situation in silence, wishing for a way out, but feeling too scared to escape. With each act of violence, Thomas tightened his hold on her, and the dream of a happy family faded further away. Those who cared about Christina wished they had seen the signs earlier, that they could have pulled her from the darkness before it was too late. This history of domestic violence loomed like a storm, waiting to strike with a terrible force, and the tragic end was already set in motion. In early February, a scary act occurred within the walls of what was once a family home filled with laughter. Thomas strangled Christina to death, but this was not a moment of blind rage. It was a calculated and deliberate act, marked by cold intent. Strangulation is a slow and intimate way to take a life, demanding time and a complete lack of empathy. The gruesome details that followed painted a horrifying picture of what transpired. Once Christina lay lifeless, the nightmare did not end for her. Thomas moved forward with a plan that can only be described as monstrous. He dismembered her body using tools that one might find in a workshop, including a jigsaw. Each cut was a chilling reminder of the horror he inflicted. This was no act of passion. It was a chilling act of control and brutality. The act of dismemberment itself is horrific, but it is what Thomas did next that truly horrifies. In one of the most disturbing twists, he took the body parts and placed them into a blender. The whirling of the machine mixed with the reality of what he was doing, transforming a life into mere remnants. It is unimaginable to think of the fear and pain Christina might have felt in her final moments. After blending her remains, he did not stop there. He attempted to dissolve what was left in a chemical solution, an act so chilling it sends shivers down the spine. This was not just murder. It was an attempt to erase all evidence of the life he had taken. This horrifying sequence of events unfolded in the silence of their home, a place that should have been a sanctuary. Instead, it became a scene of unimaginable terror. Thomas's actions showed a complete disregard for human life, leaving behind a haunting image of cruelty that would forever mark the lives of those left behind. What happened that day was not merely a crime. It was an abomination that shocked even the most hardened investigators and left a community grappling with disbelief. After the horrific discovery of Christina's body, Thomas faced the police with a shocking account. He initially claimed that Christina had died back in January. In a chilling display of denial, he insisted he had simply found her lifeless and panicked, leading him to dismember her body. This first confession seemed to lack emotion, as if he was detached from the reality of what happened. However, as investigators dug deeper, Thomas's story began to unravel. In a second confession, he presented a new narrative. He claimed that he killed Christina in self-defense, alleging that she had attacked him with a knife. This drastic change in his story raised immediate red flags for detectives. They began to suspect he was not merely a frightened husband, but a man with something much darker to hide. The shifting narratives created an unsettling atmosphere. Thomas's attempt to destroy evidence only added to the suspicion surrounding him. Blending Christina's remains and trying to dissolve them showed a clear conscience of guilt. His actions painted a picture of someone who was not reacting in pain, but rather someone who was carefully plotting to cover up a brutal crime. Investigators began to piece together the truth. The story of a man acting out of fear and self-preservation did not align with the calculated measures taken after the murder. The evidence pointed towards a premeditated act, revealing the horrifying reality of what occurred within those once loving walls. As the investigation continued, the shocking truth about Thomas and his actions became harder to ignore, leaving everyone questioning how a person could descend into such darkness. The detectives knew they had to follow the trail of lies to uncover the real story behind Christina's tragic end. During the investigation, detectives observed a chilling aspect of Thomas's personality. He displayed a remarkable lack of empathy while confessing to the crime. His words came out in a cold, almost mechanical way as he spoke about dismembering Christina. This disturbing behavior suggested he was not just a man in panic, but someone who could detach himself from the horror of his actions, hinting at sociopathic tendencies. As the questioning continued, further alarming traits emerged. Reports indicated that Thomas might have exhibited sadistic behavior. He showed no signs of remorse or sadness when discussing what he had done. Instead, he seemed almost indifferent to the gravity of his crime. The extreme measures he took to desecrate Christina's body painted a picture of a man who was completely devoid of typical human empathy and compassion. This lack of empathy could have serious consequences during the trial. If the prosecution brings forth evidence of Thomas's chilling demeanor and emotional detachment, it could significantly influence how the jury views his mental state. A jury might see him not just as a husband who lost control, but as someone who had carefully planned and executed a horrific act. Such perceptions would further weaken any attempt by the defense to argue for insanity or a temporary lapse in judgment. The courtroom would likely become a battleground of psychological insights, with the prosecution portraying Thomas as a man who understood exactly what he was doing. His actions, combined with his shocking lack of remorse, could leave jurors with a haunting image of a man capable of unimaginable evil. This unsettling narrative would not only shape the trial, but also linger in the minds of all who witnessed it. The chilling discovery of Christina's remains led to Thomas's arrest in February. From the start, the nature of his crime painted a clear picture. he was a serious danger to the public. The brutal manner in which he treated his wife's body shocked investigators and the community alike. Such a crime left no doubt that he was capable of extreme violence, raising alarms about what he might do if set free. Recently, Thomas sought to appeal for his release from custody, hoping to convince the court of his right to regain freedom. However, the court swiftly denied this request. Given the horrifying details surrounding the crime and the calculated efforts he made to conceal his actions, this decision was expected. The judge had to weigh the severity of the crime against any arguments Thomas might present for his release. Several factors likely influenced the judge's ruling. The danger Thomas posed to society was paramount. The fear that he could harm others or even attempt to flee made it clear he should remain behind bars. This situation left the community unsettled, knowing that a man accused of such horrific acts was still a threat. As the case continues to unfold, the focus remains on justice for Christina and ensuring that Thomas cannot cause any more harm. The court's decision sends a message. Some actions demand serious consequences, and the protection of the public must come first. Christina was much more than just a victim. She was a cherished mother and a well-known figure in her community. Her loss has left a deep void, affecting not only her family, but also everyone who knew her. Friends and neighbors remember her kindness and warmth, and her tragic end serves as a painful reminder of the horrors that can lurk behind closed doors. The community mourns the woman who brought joy to many, now taken away in the most horrifying manner. The future of Christina's two daughters hangs in the balance. After Thomas's arrest, questions about custody emerged, leaving the children's lives in turmoil. It is unclear who will care for them, but one thing is certain: their world has been turned upside down. They must now navigate life without their mother, facing a future clouded by uncertainty and loss. The emotional weight of such a tragedy will likely affect them for years to come, shaping their experiences as they grow. The reality of losing a beloved sister, daughter, and mother in such a violent way can create long-lasting emotional scars. As they try to cope with the horror of what happened, they must also support the children through this unimaginable time. The ripples of this tragedy will echo through their lives, forever changing their family dynamic and leaving behind a legacy of pain and heartache. The details of this case are disturbing, but they remind us of the real dangers that can exist behind closed doors. Domestic violence often escalates in ways that are difficult to predict, but in this case, it went beyond what anyone could have imagined. What could drive someone to commit such a brutal crime? And how do we protect those trapped in toxic, abusive relationships before it's too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this story compelling, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Let us know what crime story you'd like to hear next.